My son thought I didn't see him slip something strange into my work backpack, smiling like nothing had happened. But when he turned away, I quietly took it out and tucked it into his drawer. 30 minutes later, the police knocked at the door. You won't believe what happened next. Before we go on, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Terry's fist slammed the oak table. The salt shaker tipped over, scattering white crystals across the surface like shattered glass. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth, still spearing a chunk of meatloaf. Dad, we need another 2,000 this month. The words hit harder than his fist on the table. I set the fork down slowly, on purpose, and the metal clinked against the ceramic plate. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. Stella sat across from me. The ceiling light glinted off her wedding ring as she twisted it nervously on her finger. Her mascara had smudged beneath her eyes. She'd been crying before dinner. Enough, I said, sharper than I meant. You're 28, Terry. It's time you learn to support your wife yourself. He loomed over me, face flushed, anger or maybe desperation. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference with my son. The refrigerator hummed behind him, a steady murmur filling the gaps between our tight, shallow breaths. You're being selfish. His voice wavered. Mom would have understood. She would have helped. The name Martha punched the air from my lungs. My jaw tightened, hands curling without meaning to. Stella started to sob quietly, hiding her face in the napkin pressed to her mouth. The green beans on my plate had gone cold, their butter turning back to solid. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped harshly across the linoleum, and Stella flinched. The lamp above us threw hard shadows over our faces, turning family dinner into something like an interrogation. This month I already gave you count 200, I said, rising slowly. Dad, my son protested. Before that it was the wedding venue. Then the apartment deposit you two never used. After that, Stella's medical bills. Dad, please. No. I stepped away from the table, from both of them. I'm not going to keep feeding this. The smell of cooling meatloaf mixed with the thick tension, so dense it felt like you could slice it. Terry was breathing hard. Stella had stopped crying, but she stared at her plate as if the pattern in the porcelain might solve everything. The clock over the sink read 7:35. I crossed to the kitchen doorway without looking back. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if they were small defeats. Behind me, I heard Stella whisper something to Terry, urgent and pleading. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was enough. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed to my room. Each step took me further from the wreck of another family dinner, another failed attempt to connect. Downstairs, their voices rose again. Terry's fury, Stella's tears, the familiar symphony of dysfunction that had become the soundtrack of our house. The upstairs hall was dim, lit only by the glow from my bedroom. Inside, Martha's photo waited on the nightstand, frozen in a moment when we were still a family. I shut the bedroom door and dropped heavily onto the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under me, the springs protesting after 30 years of use. Martha's side stayed untouched, pillows arranged exactly as she'd left them 5 years ago. My hands trembled a little, not from fear, but from exhaustion, that deep tired that comes from fighting the same battle over and over and never gaining ground. The photo showed Martha in the blue dress she wore on our 25th anniversary cruise. Her smile was bright and real. I picked up the frame and rubbed my thumb across her face. The glass felt warm under the lamp's glow. She would have understood us, Terry had said. Maybe Martha always saw the best in people, especially in our son, but she believed in consequences too, in teaching instead of caving. 2 years ago, I sold my classic Harley to pay for the wedding venue. That bike had been my pride, a 1970 Sportster I restored myself after Martha died. I told myself I was doing it for love, for family. Terry barely said thank you. Before the check even cleared, he was asking about honeymoon expenses. 18 months later came the apartment deposit. I canceled the Alaska fishing trip I'd saved for since retiring. That was $3,000 that should have bought me mountains and silence, but it ended up in a landlord's hands for an apartment they never moved into. Some excuse about changed circumstances. 6 months ago, it was Stella's medical bills. I worked overtime at 57, my back wrecked by construction sites I shouldn't have been on anymore. Every extra dollar went to specialists and tests that found nothing worse than stress migraines. I opened the nightstand drawer. Inside was the stack of loan papers Terry had talked me into signing over the last 2 years. Personal loans, credit applications, withdrawals from my emergency fund, my signature on every one, written in moments of fatherly weakness. The paper felt thin between my fingers, as fragile as my resolve had been. $47,000. That's what my son's emergencies had cost me since Martha's funeral. $47,000 that should have secured my retirement, not financed his irresponsibility. Martha's perfume bottle still sat on the dresser, nearly empty and missing its cap. Sometimes I opened it just to remember her, but that night the scent felt more accusing than comforting. In the mirror over the dresser, I saw an old man, tired eyes, gray hair, shoulders bent under loads I wasn't meant to carry. When had I become this man? When had love turned into financial rescue? Martha's last words echoed in the quiet. Teach him to fly on his own, Ray. Don't let him live under our shadow forever. I shut the drawer firmly. The stack of papers disappeared behind the wood like evidence of my failures as a father. Downstairs, voices had dropped to urgent whispers. I could make out Terry's tone, pleading now instead of demanding. Stella's replies came in short bursts, like instructions. I set the photo back on the nightstand and turned off the lamp. Darkness wrapped around me, but I didn't lie down. I sat in the silence, listening to the house settle, to the muffled voices below, and to my breathing gradually steady. Tomorrow would be different. It had to be. The coffee maker bubbled its morning song. Steam rose from the glass carafe like incense in a church. I'd been up since 5:30, unable to sleep after last night's revelations. The kitchen looked different in the early light, cleaner, as if the dark had washed away the memory of our confrontation. I stood at the sink in my work clothes, flannel shirt and jeans that smelled faintly of sawdust from the garage shop. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked at nothing. Mrs. Peterson's newspaper lay on her front walk, waiting for her to come out in her robe and get it. Footsteps on the stairs announced Terry's arrival. He appeared in the doorway at 7:05, in a wrinkled T-shirt hanging loose over his boxers, hair sticking up in clumps, dark circles under his eyes. He avoided my gaze. "Fresh coffee," I said without turning. My voice sounded normal, controlled. "Good. Thanks," he muttered. I heard him fumble with a mug, ceramic bumping against the machine, his hands shaking slightly. Stella came in 2 minutes later, her robe wrapped tight around her small frame. Her hair was a mess, and yesterday's makeup smudged her puffy eyes. She'd been crying again. Or maybe she'd never stopped. "Good morning," she said carefully, with a thread of hope, like the right words might fix last night. I nodded without answering. The silence stretched between us like a canyon, broken only by the last hiss of the coffee maker and the distant rumble of the paper truck. I washed last night's dishes with methodical, almost automatic movements. Plate, rinse, soap, scrub. The water was almost too hot, but I welcomed the slight burn. It felt like clarity. Behind me, Terry poured coffee with shaky hands, a little splash tapping the counter in tiny beats. Stella tried to make toast, but soon the smell of burnt bread filled the kitchen. She scraped the char under the faucet, black crumbs falling like ash. "I'm heading out today," Terry announced, defensive before I could respond. "Job interviews." I turned from the sink and finally met his eyes. He looked away immediately, focusing on his mug. "Take the house key," I said quietly. The implication hung there. He might not be back, or maybe I wouldn't be here when he returned. Terry flushed but didn't argue. Morning light came through the window, catching dust motes that danced between us. Everything felt paused, expectant. I could hear my own heartbeat in the quiet, steady, decided. Terry grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl instead of sitting down. His sneakers squeaked on the floor as he paced. Nervous energy rolled off him like heat from an open oven. Terry, I stopped him mid-stride. He turned, and for a second, I saw a flash of hope in his eyes. Responsibility, I said simply. It's not a dirty word. The hope died instantly. His jaw tightened, and without another word, he left the kitchen. Seconds later, the front door slammed so hard the windows rattled. The sound cut through the house like a gunshot. Stella stayed at the table, the burnt toast untouched. She looked at me with pleading eyes, mouth opening like she might speak, but I was already moving. I poured my coffee into a travel thermos and headed for the garage. My pickup fired up on the first try, that steady purr I could always count on. Backing down the driveway, I saw Stella in the kitchen window, alone amid our interrupted breakfast and the weight of the secrets she shared with Terry. The morning stretched ahead, equal parts possibility and omen. Terry's excited voice reached me before I saw him. I'd barely closed the door behind me when he sprang from the couch, his face lit with almost frantic joy. "Dad, I'm sorry about yesterday. Tedford and Lucian's hired me." The words hit like a sucker punch. I set my lunch pail carefully on the hardwood. My work-scarred hands suddenly felt unsteady. Terry lunged in for a hug, too long, too tight. "Really?" My own voice sounded hopeful, to my surprise. "That's wonderful, son." Stella burst into theatrical applause from the love seat, quick claps like a metronome. Her makeup was flawless, too perfect for someone who'd cried all night. The bright smile painted on her face didn't reach her eyes. "They called this afternoon," she announced like a game show host. "Senior IT consultant." Terry let me go, but hovered close, raking his hands through his hair in that nervous habit I'd known since he was a kid. His shirt was spotless, freshly pressed. When had he had time to wash and iron? "I knew you'd make it," I said, feeling my shoulders finally loosen for the first time in days. Afternoon light streamed through the living room windows, catching dust in the air. Everything looked softer, forgivable even. "When do you start?" "Monday." "They want me right away," he said, voice a shade higher than normal, like he'd rehearsed the line. The familiar weight of pride mixed with relief settled in my chest. Maybe my hard words yesterday had pushed him toward real responsibility. Maybe Martha had been right. Sometimes tough love is the only way. But something itched at me. Terry smoothed his collar, flattening fabric with no wrinkles. His eyes flicked to Stella, seeking approval. "What's the salary?" I asked, dropping into my recliner. The leather creaked under me, a sound that usually comforted. 65 to start, he answered without missing a beat. "With benefits?" "Health, dental, 401k match." All the right answers, the details of a real job. So why did my engineer's mind flag inconsistencies? The timing was too neat, too convenient. Outside, a mower droned and kids laughed somewhere down the street. Normal suburban sounds at dusk. Still, they made our celebration feel staged. "This calls for a cookout," I said, pushing aside my doubts. "I'll fire up the grill. Let's celebrate the right way." Terry's face lit up. This time, it looked like genuine happiness. "Perfect, Dad. Like old times." Stella clapped again, softer now, still playing a part. "I'll make my potato salad, the mustard one you love." I stood, joints protesting after another long day on the job. "Give me 20 minutes to get the coals right. Terry, you can help me set up in a bit." "Actually, I need to run upstairs first," he said, already moving to the stairs. "Just some interview papers. I want to show you the offer letter." I nodded and headed to the back door. The grill waited under its black cover like a faithful friend. Tonight felt like a new start, another chance to rebuild what had almost fallen apart. Behind me, I heard Terry's steps on the stairs, Stella moving into the kitchen, the sounds of a normal family on a normal evening. "What meat should I throw on? What meat do you want?" I called, already knowing Terry would choose burgers and Stella would ask for chicken. The coals were just catching. Small flames licked the briquettes with growing confidence. I wiped my hands on the kitchen towel hanging from the grill handle, savoring the familiar ritual. The warm air smelled of lighter fluid and the promise of a quiet family dinner. 10 minutes passed. Terry had gone upstairs for the papers. Through the kitchen window, I watched Stella moving back and forth, fixing sides. Everything looked normal, right? I turned toward the house to see if Terry wanted to help set up. The kitchen window framed the living room like a picture, the warm ceiling light spilling over familiar furniture. And then I saw it. Terry stood by the front door, hunched over my navy work backpack. His movements were quick, furtive, nothing like the confident young man who'd been talking about his new job. He glanced around before opening the main compartment. My grip tightened on the grill fork. What was he doing with my bag? I stepped a little closer to the window, keeping to the shadow beneath the patio overhang. Terry pulled something small from his pocket, wrapped in what looked like dark tissue paper. With practiced precision, he nestled it at the bottom of my backpack, between my work gloves and the tape measure. The rational part of my mind searched for a harmless reason. A thank you gift? A surprise? But his behavior, the quick looks, the careful way he hid it, said something else. He zipped the bag and backed away fast, rubbing his hands on his jeans like he was wiping off evidence. It took less than 30 seconds, but I lived it like a slow-motion crime. Grill smoke curled around me, suddenly acrid. My stomach dropped when Terry disappeared from view, probably heading to the kitchen or back upstairs. Neighborhood sounds, a dog barking 3 houses down, the faint traffic, felt muted, like the world had slipped a degree off its axis. I forced myself back to the grill, mind racing. The coals glowed red, ready for cooking, but my appetite was gone. Whatever Terry had tucked into my bag, it mattered, maybe dangerous, but calling him on it now would reveal I was watching my own son. The back door creaked open. "Dad, how are those coals?" Terry's voice wore that same fake cheer. "Almost ready," I said without turning. "Just a few more minutes." I heard his steps on the deck. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him lean on the railing, picture of calm, but I couldn't unsee his secretive movements at my bag. "You know what, son?" I said at last, looking at him. "I think I left my gloves in the garage. Grab them for me while I tend the fire?" His smile stuttered for a heartbeat. "Sure, Dad, no problem." He went back inside, and I watched him cross the living room through the window, passing the backpack without a glance. A flawless performance, too flawless for someone who'd just stashed something in there. Whatever it was, I had to know, but I needed the right moment. "I'm grabbing condiments from the kitchen," I called toward Stella, just as Terry turned on the upstairs bathroom tap. The pipes groaned. That was my cue. I had a few precious minutes. My heart pounded as I crossed to the backpack. The living room looked different now, the shadows thicker despite the warm lamplight. Every settling creak sounded like an alarm ready to give me away. I pulled the zipper. The metal hissed in the quiet. Inside were my usual tools, yellow tape measure, leather gloves cured by years of honest work, the notebook with project sketches, all in order except for the foreign thing I'd seen him hide. I reached deeper through the organized mess of my working life. There it was, wrapped in dark paper, tucked beside the spiral of my notebook like a guilty secret. I unwrapped it carefully. The tissue crackled as loud as gunshots in the hush. And then I saw it. A diamond ring. A huge center stone encircled by smaller gems set in what looked like platinum. The facets caught the lamplight, throwing rainbows across the table and wall. My breath caught. This wasn't costume jewelry. The weight told me that. It was real, expensive, easily $15,000, maybe $20,000, way more than Terry had ever had, more than he could earn in months at that supposed new job. I collapsed into the nearest chair, legs unable to hold me. The ring burned in my hand, searing me with questions I didn't want to answer. Where had he gotten it? Why hide it in my backpack? What was his plan? Water still ran upstairs. Terry's nervous humming filtered through the ceiling, a tune I didn't recognize and now found unsettling. Normal sounds of my son that didn't feel normal anymore. The ring's sparkle mocked me. I remembered last night's fight, his desperate pleas for money, Stella's tears. Had they planned this since then, using my generosity as cover for something darker? My engineer's mind started mapping scenarios, none of them good. If Terry had stolen that ring, hiding it in my backpack made me an accomplice. If he intended to blame me, I was already trapped in his plan. The water upstairs shut off. Footsteps crossed the bathroom. He'd be down any second, expecting to find me on the deck, proud, grilling steaks for a celebration. On instinct, I slid the ring into my pocket and put the backpack back the way it was, folding the tissue as I'd found it. My hands shook as I pulled the zipper closed. Terry's steps thumped at the top of the stairs, just as I stood, knees still weak. The ring was a lump of lead in my pocket, evidence of a betrayal, a truth I wasn't ready for. "Dad, everything okay in there?" Terry called with that practiced concern. "Be right out," I said, moving into the kitchen on autopilot. My body went through the motions while my mind reeled. The ring burned against my leg with every step, a reminder that nothing about tonight was what it seemed. Terry's voice drifted through the window. "How do you want the steaks? Medium?" "Use your judgment," I answered, strangely steady despite the storm inside me. The ring tugged at my pocket, heavier than denim. My feet found the stair runner, avoiding the third step that had squeaked for 20 years. Every move was measured, precise, the mindset of an engineer facing an impossible problem. Terry had invaded my privacy, my trust. Something was terribly wrong, and I wasn't going to face it blind. The hallway stretched ahead, flanked by family photos that now looked like exhibits from a life I never fully understood. Terry's bedroom door stood ajar. Through the glass, I could see his silhouette over the grill, playing the part of a good family man. I nudged the door open carefully, testing the hinges for squeaks. Silent. I'd kept them oiled for years. Inside, the room smelled like Stella's perfume and the barbecue smoke drifting in, her clothes draped over the chair. Terry's laptop sat closed on the desk, papers scattered nearby. The dresser stood against the back wall, 3 drawers stacked like secrets waiting to be found. I chose the middle one, the sock drawer, the most innocent hiding place. My work-worn hands moved through his things, parting cotton and underwear until I'd made a small hollow. If Terry could put things in my backpack without permission, I could return the favor. The dark tissue crackled softly as I buried the ring deep in that drawer, exactly where anyone searching for evidence would look. "Dad, these coals are perfect." Terry's voice sounded full of real enthusiasm, or the best imitation I'd ever heard. I slid the drawer shut, making sure everything looked as it had. The room held no trace of me except the fading warmth of my hands and the fact that the rules of the game had just changed. Outside the window, Terry set something on the patio table with easy, confident motions. He had no idea that 30 feet above him, his plan was unraveling thread by thread. My heart thudded in my ears as I headed back to the hall. Whatever he meant to do with that ring, whatever part he'd written for me in his story, I'd just rewritten the script. If he wanted to play with planted evidence, he'd learn his father hadn't spent a lifetime in engineering without understanding how to take things apart. The stairs took my weight in reverse order, my feet skipping the familiar squeaks. In the kitchen, I grabbed a bottle of steak sauce from the pantry, my excuse for coming in. Through the window, Terry waved with a big, warm smile. I stepped back onto the patio just as several car doors slammed out front. The sound cracked the evening air like gunshots. I turned toward the street, spatula still in the air, trying to understand why multiple vehicles had pulled up without warning in the middle of our family dinner. Terry's face changed instantly. The carefree smile vanished, replaced by something like excited anticipation. He moved toward the house with purpose, no longer the relaxed son helping with the grill. "Who is it?" I asked, confusion plain in my voice. "Were you expecting someone?" "No idea," Terry said, but his tone sounded stagey, not surprised. "Maybe neighbors worried about the smoke." Voices approached from the front yard, firm, professional. My stomach dropped as I understood. Not neighbors. 3 uniformed officers rounded the side gate, led by a woman with a severe face, 40s, hand near her radio, eyes assessing with practiced calm. "Police, nobody move." I stepped back without meaning to. The spatula slipped from my hand and clattered on the pavers. Stella came out of the kitchen with a salad bowl and froze at the sight of the officers. The bowl slid from her hands and lettuce scattered across the red bricks like confetti at the worst party. Terry pointed at me immediately, finger steady, no hesitation. "Officer, it's him." I saw the ring in his backpack. The words hit like a hammer. "What are you talking about?" I stammered, disbelief catching my voice. "What ring?" But Terry was already moving toward the lead officer, eager to help. Too eager. His body language screamed certainty, not the concern of a son watching his father accused of a crime. "Officer Brooks," the woman said, sweeping the scene with sharp eyes, "we received a report of stolen jewelry." "Terry Arlen," my son said at once, almost proudly. "I found evidence in my father's possession, a diamond ring from yesterday's robbery at the downtown jeweler." Yesterday. Right when he claimed he'd been at job interviews. The pieces clicked into place in my engineer's mind, each revelation more nauseating than the last. Officer Brooks spoke into a radio while her partners fanned out across the patio. The grill smoked on, steak starting to burn, souring the air. "Sir, step away from the grill," Brooks ordered. Professional tone, but no room to argue. I moved slowly, hands visible, mind reeling at the impossibility. This was my house, my family, my cookout. Yet they treated me like a criminal, based on my own son's testimony. Terry walked with the officers toward the house, describing the evidence with suspicious familiarity. He knew exactly where my backpack was, which compartment I used. Too precise, too detailed for someone who'd only stumbled on something. Stella followed, tears streaking her carefully made-up face. But the way she clung to Terry, the polished way she showed distress, it all felt choreographed. As we reached the back door, I caught Terry's reflection in the kitchen window. For an instant, when he thought no one was looking, his expression shifted. The mask of the worried son slid, and I saw something cold, calculating. My own son had called the police on me, and somehow I was walking straight into a trap that must have been weaving itself for 30 years. Officer Brooks laid out the contents of my backpack on the coffee table with methodical precision. Work gloves, tape measure, protein bars, notebook, small tools. The honest inventory of a man who'd spent his life building, not stealing. Terry stood beside her, confident, pointing out compartments. "It'll be in the front pocket," he said. "Wrapped in tissue. I saw him put it there this afternoon." His certainty was crushing. Too crushing. No son should know his father's hiding spots that well, unless he'd put something there himself. Brooks checked every pocket with care. The main compartment held only work leftovers. The side ones had pens and business cards. Terry's confident look began to crack. "Mr. Arlen," Brooks said, glancing up from the empty bag, "we're not finding the item you described." "It has to be there," he snapped, voice climbing into panic. "I saw him put it in the front pocket." "Check it again," Terry insisted, desperation flooding in. That's when the last piece clicked. Terry's inside knowledge, his nervous energy dressed up as excitement, the way he steered the officers to my backpack while never mentioning his own things. "Officer," I said calmly, surprised at the strength in my voice, "you might want to check my son's dresser. Middle drawer." Terry spun toward me, panic flashing across his face. "What? That's ridiculous. There's no reason to—" But Officer Brooks was already moving for the stairs with her partner. Terry's protests grew shriller as we climbed. His carefully built composure crumbled. "This is harassment. You can't search our private—" "Terry Arlen," Brooks cut in as she opened the bedroom door. "We have reasonable cause based on your father's statement and your behavior." The dresser sat exactly as I'd left it 30 minutes earlier. Officer Miller pulled open the middle drawer and sifted through socks and underwear with practiced hands. His fingers hit the dark tissue at once. Terry's face went white when the ring came up. The diamonds flashed under the bedroom lamp like physical accusations. The same ring I'd found in my backpack now slid into an evidence bag, Terry's fingerprints on the wrapping paper. "Terry Arlen, you're under arrest for filing a false report in possession of stolen property." The reading of his rights sounded far away, like from another room, as cuffs closed around my son's wrists. Stella's sobs filled the hall, her rehearsed act finally collapsing into real despair. "This is a mistake," Terry shouted as they led him toward the front door. "You don't understand." The ring was in his backpack. I put it there myself. His confession hung in the air like the smoke from our abandoned grill. Even under arrest, he couldn't help revealing just how deep his scheme ran. I stood in the living room, surrounded by my belongings spread out and furniture shifted during the search, watching 30 years of fatherhood dissolve into cuffs and accusations. Through the front window, neighbors gathered on their porches, drawn by the flashing lights. Terry's voice still carried from the yard, insisting it was all a misunderstanding, trying to convince the officers that his own father had framed himself. But the evidence told a different story, one written on tissue paper and hidden in a sock drawer, narrated by a son who mistook a father's love for weakness. The house felt different now, emptier, as if something essential had left with my son in handcuffs. Police paperwork piled on the kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle I'd never wanted to solve. Timelines, evidence photos, witness statements, the official trail of my son's betrayal. I'd been sitting there since 6 a.m, reviewing every detail with an engineer's precision. The coffee in Martha's favorite mug had gone cold hours ago, but I couldn't drink it. Everything in that kitchen felt contaminated, every surface touched by lies I'd been too trusting to see. Terry's statement to the police, taken before his arrest, painted a picture of a worried son who had uncovered his father's criminal behavior. Reading his words felt like watching a stranger wear my son's face. Prepared answers, calculated deceit. This wasn't a moment of impulse. It was months of planning. A photo from Diamond Haven Jewelers showed the exact ring I'd found in my backpack, $18,500. The documents outlined Terry's credit card debt, $23,000, most of it lost gambling at Prairie Wind Casino. The numbers locked together with surgical precision. The so-called interview was his alibi for the theft, I said out loud. Saying it made it real, inescapable. The celebration dinner, the steaks on the grill, everything designed to relax me and drop my guard. If his plan had worked, I'd be in a cell right now while Terry inherited this house and everything I'd spent 30 years building. They'd have let me rot in prison for his comfort. A knock at the door cut through the dark turn of my thoughts. Through the window, I recognized Cecil's silhouette, concern written in his posture. I'd known this moment would come. The neighborhood had been buzzing with rumors since the sirens and flashing lights last night. "Ray," he said, careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "I saw the news this morning. Thought you could use company." I opened the door to find my neighbor with 2 coffees and the expression I'd seen him wear in front of dozens of victims' families back when he was on the force. Cecil understood betrayal in a way most people didn't. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "I'm trying to piece together how long this has been going on." Cecil studied the table covered in reports and photos. His trained eye weighed the evidence with professional clarity, but the friend showed in the heaviness of his shoulders. "This looks like a sophisticated setup," he said, sitting across from me. "Your son knew exactly how to manipulate the evidence. If you hadn't moved that ring—" "I don't even know why I did," I admitted. "Instinct, I guess. Something felt off about the whole night." Cecil traced the timeline sheet with his finger, following Terry's movements. Your instinct saved you from a conviction, he said. Look at this. They had everything planned. The time of the robbery, the planted evidence, even Stella's alibi statement. The smell of bacon drifted in from somewhere down the block, underlining what this morning should have been. Normal. Instead, I sat surrounded by proof that my own son had tried to destroy me for cash. He would have inherited everything if I'd gone to prison, I said, as the full reach of it finally crystallized. The house, my retirement savings, even Martha's life insurance. Cecil nodded gravely. And with your name stained as a criminal, who would have doubted his story? The perfect crime, if you hadn't been smarter than he thought. I stacked the papers into neat piles. My engineer's mind organized the chaos into manageable categories: evidence, chronology, financial motive, consequences. Each stack represented a different angle on my son's willingness to sacrifice his father for personal gain. I need legal counsel, I said at last. About the house, about Stella living here, about protecting what I have left. Cecil stood, understanding that this conversation closed one chapter and opened another. We'll find you a lawyer, Ray. It's time to start thinking about your future instead of staying tied to his betrayal, he finished. I looked around the kitchen, the place where family meals once brought joy and now only carried stained memories. The table where Terry's fist had hit, the window where I'd seen him plant evidence, the chairs where lies were served with dinner. Standing felt like lifting something heavy, but also like shedding something I no longer meant to carry. The courthouse steps felt solid beneath my feet as Cecil and I climbed to the entrance at 8:30 sharp. 3 weeks working with the prosecutors had led to this moment, watching my son face the consequences of trying to ruin my life. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet efficiency. The dark wood and formal air couldn't hide the human drama about to unfold. I adjusted my tie, uncomfortable in the suit I'd worn to Martha's funeral 5 years ago. Terry sat at the defense table in a county jail jumpsuit, cuffed, showing the wear of weeks behind bars. When our eyes met, I saw despair replacing the confidence he'd worn the night of the cookout. Stella sat in the gallery behind the defense, pale and drawn, dressed in what looked like borrowed clothes. Mr. Arlen, describe what you observed on April 17th, the prosecutor began after I swore to tell the truth. I saw my son place a stolen ring in my backpack to frame me for a robbery, I answered, voice clear and factual, like an engineer reporting observations. The defense tried to paint it as misunderstanding rather than malice. Isn't it possible you were mistaken about your son's intentions, Mr. Arlen? No, I said firmly. The evidence speaks for itself. Diamond Haven's security footage played on the big screen, showing Terry committing the theft in high definition. The timestamp matched exactly the hour he claimed he was at a job interview. I watched my son's face as he saw himself on the screen, the moment he realized his lies had been recorded. When Judge Redford called for sentencing, Terry tried one last burst. Dad, you don't understand? I was desperate, gambling debts. Terry Arlen, the judge cut in, voice severe. You are sentenced to 5 years in state prison for armed robbery and attempted witness tampering. The gavel hit like a door slamming on 30 years of fatherhood. Deputies led him away in chains. His eyes searched for mine one last time, but I held my ground. Stella got 2 years of probation and community service for cooperating, and in order to find new housing within 30 days. The judge's speech about rehabilitation versus punishment felt distant and academic compared to the blunt reality of watching my son vanish through the courtroom door. When the session ended, reporters crowded the hallway with questions about family betrayal and justice. I walked straight to the parking garage, mind already turning to practical things, selling the house and starting fresh. Cecil paced beside me, quiet, knowing some moments don't need words. The courthouse elevator carried us down to street level, where normal life kept going despite the wreckage of mine. How do you feel? Cecil asked when we reached his car. Like I just buried my son, I said honestly. But this time, it was his choice to die. The ride home was quiet and thoughtful. The suburbs of Omaha looked different now that I knew I'd leave them soon. Some chapters end with celebration, others with relief. This one ended with acceptance, the truth that family can betray the deepest trust. Survival meant putting my own well-being ahead of any duty to people who'd abandoned me. Moving boxes lined the hallway like sentries guarding my escape route. 30 years of accumulation paired to essentials, tools, clothes, photos of Martha, and the legal documents that proved my innocence. Everything else, furniture, appliances, memories tied to this house, would stay with the ghosts. Stella walked out of the guest room with a single suitcase, her face pinched with panic. The court order required her to leave the same day I did, but while my future pointed to freedom, hers was uncertain. "Ray, please, think again," she said, stepping between me and the door. "I have nowhere to go." Terry made me. I was scared to say no. I stopped and looked at the woman who'd helped plan my undoing. Her ring flashed in the morning light, the same one she'd twisted nervously while lying about Terry's interviews. "You should have thought about the consequences before you betrayed me," I said calmly. "You had choices, Stella. You chose badly. But where will I go? I have no money, no family." "You'll figure it out. People who survive betrayal always do." The real estate agent arrived at 10 on the dot with the final paperwork. Mrs. Henderson had been patient through the whole sale. She understood that trauma takes time. We signed at the kitchen table, the same place where so many family fights had erupted, transferring the property from Ray Arlon to a young couple excited for their first home. "Here are the keys to your apartment in Denver," the agent said, handing me a small envelope. "1 bedroom, mountain view. Just what you asked for." Cecil appeared in the doorway after helping load the moving truck that would follow my pickup west. His handshake lasted a beat longer than usual, recognition that one chapter had ended and another was starting. "Promise you'll visit in 6 months," I said, meaning it. "Promise you'll answer when I call," he replied, knowing healing needs distance, not isolation. The truck pulled out first, carrying my things toward the new life I'd mapped out, one that didn't depend on disloyal family. I walked through the empty rooms one last time, taking down photos of Terry but leaving the nails, proof that someone had once belonged here. In the garage, my pickup waited, the essentials already strapped in back. Fresh Colorado plates, new address, new phone number, the framework of a complete reinvention. Stella stood on the curb, watching as I backed down the driveway where I'd taught Terry to ride a bike 20 years ago. Good memories can't erase betrayal, but they can't stop you from choosing happiness over obligation, either. The interstate signs pointed toward Denver and new possibilities. I tuned the radio to a country station, rolled down the windows, and felt a freedom I hadn't known since Martha died. Miles fell away under my tires as Omaha faded in the rear view. Colorado's mountains rose on the horizon like promises of height and perspective. At 58, I was starting from scratch. No family ties, no financial obligations to anyone but myself, no guilt about putting my well-being first. The truck's engine hummed west, carrying a man who'd learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to keep feeding those who want to destroy you. Behind me lay 30 years of family loyalty. Ahead was everything I chose to build with the time I had left. And for the first time in years, that was enough. If you liked this story, tap like, subscribe, and share what it made you feel in the comments. To hear the next one, click the box on the left. Thanks for listening.